It's a real honor to come back to the Penn State Nutrition Conference, probably one of the premier nutrition conferences in the world. It is really a well-respected conference as far as that goes. Again, I want to appreciate the invitation again from Ajinomoto to be on your conference. I think we have a fun topic for you, so hang on to your hats. We're going to be off and running here today. My topic is, let's look at some management options, and I'm going to give you 8 of them. And not only are the 8, but they're listed in your proceeding because I knew there'd be people from Penn State here and some veterinarians in the crowd, so I thought I'd give you the 8 right away because if you're in my class, you'd have to be able to recite those. Why are we going to talk about milk protein? And this is kind of a fun topic. Most of you here in Pennsylvania, as we are in Illinois, we are paid for pounds of protein and pounds of fat. That's how we earn our paycheck as far as that goes. Interestingly, about 40% of our dairy product, that number is actually up a little bit, although butter is challenging that a little bit. We're eating about 40% of its cheese, and that's got protein written all over it. How many here drink Fairlife? Anybody here drink Fairlife milk? We've had it. It tastes a little bit different, but it is 50% higher in protein and lower in lactose. So certainly there we go. And then of course, we've got the Greek yogurts as well. So that's got protein, in my view, written all over it. Thought we'd kind of look at this. We'll see a little more history on that in a bit later. Right now, milk fat's about $3 a pound. It came down a little bit. This is updated from what's in your proceedings. You'll see a couple different slides. That's good. You came here because we don't just follow all the PowerPoints proceeding. True protein to $2.11 a pound, October 2017. Interesting release in news about 3 weeks ago. Butter now is driving about 50% of the current milk price at the farm gate. And that's kind of an interesting fact. And there's a shortage of butter. In fact, there's just a release that the French people are getting very nervous. They don't have enough butter to make all their pastries as far as that goes. So the question for you and I is going to be, what about this future in milk pricing? And what about consumers? And my view is, they're going to buy it. They're going to buy animal protein. And second of all, what signals are we sending to our dairy farmers right now? And we move on. I thought it'd be fun to go back and look a little bit. This is 11 months ago. And you can see here 11 months ago, look where protein was, where it went. And now we're coming back a little bit. So it's really switching. That's nothing new to you. Here's your milk fat as well, other solids. And of course, here sits your base price. So certainly that's a challenge as well as this protein price continues to move around on us. So why are we worried about this? And so we say, well, and I'm going to use amino acids because I think that's where we're going. We'll hear more about that later this morning. Why are we worried about amino acids for dairy cattle? And we know it has 4 impacts. Number 1, it has an impact on feed intake and the use of energy. Very important. Number 2, we have to have nitrogen here for the rumen microbes. And I think we'll be hearing more about that. That's not my assignment here. But if you look at that, ammonia, amino acids, and peptides. Number 3, we need amino acids. The dairy cow needs amino acids for these 3 functions listed there for you. And then I think we might hear a little bit about this. And that is, what about as a source of carbon in our transition cow diet? And there's some very interesting work years ago by our colleague Bill Chalupa, who unfortunately passed on, that was looking at that aspect. So certainly a lot of different reasons why we're interested in amino acids. And I got this slide from the University of Wisconsin. And it's kind of a fun one because this is your job as a dairy farmer, as nutritionist, a veterinarian, a feed company. And that is, we're going to start with 500 grams of nitrogen. And then this dairy cow does some rather interesting things because it goes through the rumen. And we'll be hearing more about that a bit later. That's not my job. And these are just numbers of where it goes. Remember, this is grams of nitrogen now. So you can multiply this by 6.25, whatever you want to do with that. But it comes down here and goes to the liver. It does some pretty unique things as well. Eventually, we're going to trace that around. And of course, the Cornell people are really looking at this recycling of urea in terms of can we capture more of that coming around. Then, of course, she's going to send it over to the kidney. And of course, now we're in the urine business. So the question is, how much nitrogen? And just look at this. Just look at that. Here's your intake. Here's out in the urine. And then, of course, we come down here and we follow it on down a bit further. And eventually, of course, we end up with milk. Wake up. This model says about 157 grams of this ends up in the milk. That's about 30%. Think about that. Protein efficiency. How many think that's going to be a big term in the next 5 or 10 years? Protein efficiency. How efficient can our dairy cattle take protein from the diet and put it into something that you and I can utilize as human? Now, I understand byproduct feeds and forages, but the point is, if you're telling consumers we're only capturing a third of it and the other third is going into the environment, we move on. So kind of a fun chart to look at, and we'll be hearing more about how you and I will work these various things. Now, this I had to update because she just came on board recently. How many have seen the picture of her? There's your world record cow. Look at that girl. She is producing 2,400 pounds of true protein from Wisconsin. So you kind of say, look at the tremendous production on this cow here, and that's now the new record cow. You got the old record cow in your proceedings because we had to get the PowerPoints in a bit early for Judd's book. So here we go. Get your notebooks out. We're going to have 8 factors. And if you can't recite the 8 factors, there is no lunch for you. That's going to be the lunch question as far as that goes. We thought it'd be football, but we thought we wouldn't do that. Okay, number 1. And remember, the theme is, what do we got to get right before you and I start looking at other aspects of amino acid applications in the diet? So number 1, evaluating milk components. And this is that old story, Hutjens. Yeah, it's an old story, but of course, here's the new data. And I'm going to pick on Holsteins. Every year I update my PowerPoints, and you know the one that's changing on the Holsteins? Fat. That used to be 3.7. And so now this is Horse Dairyman DHIR data from the U.S. And so you can see the fat is going up. The protein stays very much right around 3. And again, for our Canadian colleagues, you're going to add 0.2 of a point to that because we are true protein and you have total protein. So just be careful if you're from Canada or Mexico or other countries that you're aware we don't have apples and oranges going here. So the question is, are your herds, is your feed company, are you getting this genetic potential? And here's your ratio. I divide this fat into the protein, that's 81%. It used to be 83%. And if you go the other way around, this is what Wisconsin tends to use. You divide the protein into the fat, you get 1.26. So what are those ratios? And if those ratios aren't there, there's what there, guys and gals? There's an opportunity. To me, there's an opportunity. Now, you never get anything new. This is brand new data. This is the first conference we've used it at. John Clay. I asked John Clay, I needed it for a couple of reasons. Could you go back and tell me what the 30,000-pound herds are doing? So in your booklet, table number, it's the only table in your book, page 2, I believe. There you've got the Holstein data. And what he did, he went in December, so there's no seasonality. This is December of 2016. They took a snapshot of herds at 30,000 plus or minus, 26, 23, and I knew we would come to Pennsylvania, we have 20,000, some of the lower producing herds, Okay, is the microphone working? You have Pennsylvania guys, are you catching on? That was supposed to be funny. David, did you think it was funny? No, we move on. Okay, take a look at this. I thought it was amazing. Take a look at that table. Because I look here, and let's just pick on the top one right here. This is third lactation cows, 30,000-pound herds. There's about 200, it's in the book, about 230 in there. There's over 2,000 of these down here. But notice, this is the butter fat, and there's your protein, 2.9. What are Holsteins supposed to be at? About 3.1. Look at 40 days. Look at 40 to 100 days. That number actually went down. Now look at the table, 1 to 200 days. We're on the chart. We're on the chart. And I thought that's really amazing. And actually, the herds that are in bigger trouble are what? The lower producing herds tend to have more problems than the 30,000-pounder. Now, for most of you, that's not going to be surprising. I thought that was amazing. So the question is, if you've got herds at 30,000 pounds of milk or 22,000 pounds of milk, is there an opportunity in the first 100 days to impact milk protein yield and level in the herd? Really fun to look. There's Jersey here. I got the Jersey here. Got some Jersey guys here? Anybody got jerseys here? Okay, nobody wants to raise their hands. I had a really funny joke. We'll move on. Okay, we won't have that humor then. We'll move on. But there it is. So I think that's a very interesting table. It's kind of the new thing for this year to see where are there opportunities on the herd. Next question you might ask, well, if I take these elite herd, and this would be the breed breakdowns. Thanks to Larry Jones, I'm looking here. Basically, you're looking at 2.24 pounds of protein being produced per day, and that's what 70 pounds of milk here, about 5 pounds of protein, total solids. What's that number with your herds? 500 pounds, 5 pounds, and are you getting the numbers right here? And yeah, You have them here in New York, Pennsylvania, herds over 100 pounds of milk. And them dudes are piping out, as you can see, nearly 7 pounds of solids a day. Just really amazing as we move on. So again, the question is, where are these benchmarks? Where are your herds fitting in? That's my challenge. Is there an opportunity with some of your herds as far as that goes? There's an action herd in northwestern Illinois a year ago. He was averaging, a breed average pretty much for Illinois, 70 pounds of milk with a 3.5 butterfat test and 2.9 true protein. So we're just off about a little bit of fat and protein. So if you as nutritionists, as a veterinarian, can figure out why, if I get that back to the horde's average, now that would be 3.8. We can update that a bit later if you want. What's laying on the table? With today's protein and fat prices, 52 cents laying on the table if you and I can get the components back to where they should be for the breed average. 52 cents a day, a big number? That's a big number. If you can have a dairy meeting and you can find 25 cents for every cow in the herd, those guys and gals will leave the meeting like you are really good. You're really good. So certainly, again, this has a huge economic impact as far as that goes. I'm going to go over this area very quickly because we talked about this about 3 years ago at this conference, and that is not only can you use milk protein being paid for, but also looking at some of the relationships. In Wisconsin, they have what they call the Wisconsin Transition Score Index. And they use not only, they use previous milk, and they use milk components, and they use a few other factors as well. But it simply says, if your cows, if this ratio of fat to protein is greater than 1.4, shame on you. That means those cows are really mobilizing body fat. And if you look at that data from North Carolina, those 30,000 pound herds, they have the highest what? Fat test. Now, is that because they're feeding more fat? Or they're mobilizing body fat, or they got the rumen working well, according to Dave Barbano. Lots of different things going on there as well. And so I usually, my thumb rule says, if you've got a bunch of Holstein cows at early lactation with a 4.5 butterfat test, it's a wake-up call. Now, maybe you don't want 4 or 5. Whatever number you want. The question is, when do you think the fat-protein ratio is really out of line? And what are the health ramifications? Another way to look at is looking at what we call this milk fat depression. This is the number I use here. So if I got a 100-cow herd, you get out your last DHI sheet, and you circle every cow in which the milk protein test, true protein, is 0.2 of a point higher than the fat test. Circle every one of those. And if there's more than 10% of those cows, wow. Now, you Canadians, you're going to use 0.4. But it's a nice thumb rule, again, to kind of sleuth out. Now, if you've got 1,000 cows, you can use a lot of ink. But for a 100, 150 cow dairy herd, what a neat tool to use as far as that goes. That's factor number one. Now, normally we're going to stay right on schedule here on time. Be a great time to take questions. Number two, factor number two is driving a dry matter intake. And why are we going to talk about that? Because dry matter intake is huge. And I'm going to let most of you read this. I'm assuming you can read faster than I can talk. That could be questioned at times. Right, Dr. Byers? We move on. But basically, remember, we're looking at dry matter that drives the amount of the nutrient. We all know that. Cows don't need 15% protein. They need so many grams of lysine or so many grams of methionine. And here in blue, I guess that's Penn State blue. Maybe it's not dark enough. We move on. Anyway, dry matter, more dry matter means more organic matter intake, means more digestible nutrients, which means more microbial yield. And as we Catholics would say, bingo, that's a bingo right there, because that means I'm going to get more amino acids being synthesized by the bacteria. Plus, I'm going to drive VFA production. So to me, I'm going to ask, are your farms achieving the dry matters that you and I would like to see out there? And so I just give you two numbers here. This is NRC 89. This is my table. Every one of you nutritionists have a table for dry matter intake that you said yes, Pete or Sally or Harry, and you are there. So I'm just going to pick here. Here's that 88-pound average Illinois cow, I wish. 88 pounds, 4% fat corrected milk. She should eat 53 pounds of dry matter. My Canadian colleagues, we got them over in kilograms, so we'll move on. Now remember that number. David, you got that number, 53 pounds. If you go to NRC 2001, that number becomes 58. That's a big-time number. My guys and gals struggle to achieve that big number. In fact, when we balance rations, David, we can get there with the lower number. So the question is, which number are you going to use? And we're going to get a new NRC in the next 10 years probably. Who knows? But that number will change as well. So that's another question. What is your benchmark going to be for dry matter intake? Because it really drives these things we listed there earlier. And here's something that comes out of the NRC, and Helena may fine-tune this, but it simply shows you that if I can drive energy, then I can drive protein, and of course, microbial protein looks pretty fancy. And you see this table comes from Dr. Chuck Schwab, and you can see over here, here sits my bacteria, your lysine, methionine, and it looks like God got it about right. Because now you get to see what happens on lean tissue and milk. And here's all my feedstuffs. And of course, that is before it goes through the rumen. And rumen does some unique things to these amino acids. No question about that. So you can see why we're excited. Are you getting the dry matter intakes relative to that herd to drive this program over here? So what tool are you going to use? And all of you knew I was going to eventually sneak 2 of these in, because I just love feed efficiency. And I see you're going to have a breakout session on it, so you're going to hear more about that. But feed efficiency simply says, well, how much milk, 3.5, be careful, this is 3.5, not 4%, 3.5 fat correcting milk per pound of dry matter consumed. And we're simply saying we want to be somewhere around 1.5. At our dairy days, we should be at the door and ask every dairy farmer, what is his feed efficiency? And if he or she can't tell us, they don't get to come to dairy day. To me, that's just as important as knowing their rolling herd average, or pounds of fat and protein, or average daily gain in heifers. A whole bunch of benchmarks there as well. So we use 1.5 for a herd, and basically what our average herd size is 160 cows. We are, by and large, a one-group herd. A one-group herd here in Illinois. Now, if you want to go to Norman St. Pierre's number, I like this table as well. Here we're looking at milk yield. And now you can see feed efficiency is associated with the various levels of milk yield in terms of pounds and kilos as well. So another nice table. So another benchmark you can look at, and that's feed efficiency. Because I think it's so powerful, because it ties together milk production and dry matter intake. And to me, that's a very useful tool, especially for those of you who got big herds, and you have high groups and mid groups and low groups and heifer groups. Some really interesting numbers as well. Moving on, factor number 3. Well, I think everybody has to be running with a Rumen model. So we're going to hear more about that a bit later. And maybe in the Q&A you can ask one of those researchers which is the right one. I will not answer that for you. But I think you just got to be there. You just have to be there. Because the metabolizable protein, and we'll hear more about that in our next speaker, that's going to give us a little idea of the amount of amino acids that my cow is going to be exposed to or have available for her. And so we're going to have 2 sources. You all know that already. We don't need to go plowing through that there. So you're going to get this. And one of my messages, by driving dry matter intake, I'm trying to maximize that number. Otherwise, I've got to buy it down here to get the job done. So let's take a look at some interesting data. This comes from a colleague, Dr. Varga at Penn State. And this she looks at a number of different studies here, and it says, look at the relationship between milk yield and dietary protein, and the answer is, man, that doesn't look very exciting to you and I, does it? So then why are we still using crude protein in our programs, buying our feed? And that is because that's what's on our feed tag. Number 2, I can't give you a metabolizable protein number because I have to have a model, because all the factors that go in to drive that value out here in the program. And so I need to have a model, some type of a software program that's going to estimate amino acid yields that are coming from both sources. Because both sources are always what? They're changing. They're changing on you and I as you go through it. So that's where you have to be. And this is a Vermont table, actually. And they look here. This is metabolizable protein allowable for milk. This is the actual milk. And is this a little prettier PowerPoint than the one from Penn State? Nothing wrong with Penn State. Simply say the same data, in most cases, same data simply says a much, much nicer fit with an R-square that is nearly 0.72. Just a beautiful fit. So I think we've convinced you, or at least hopefully I'm convinced, metabolizable protein is where we are today. And maybe we'll be going to amino acids here in the next 45 minutes as well. Factor number 4. Still with me? Factor number 4. Okay, I'm going to max out metabolizable microbial protein. What am I going to buy? What am I putting in the feeding program to build amino acids to meet my cow's requirements? And this is data that comes out of NRC. And my colleague did a nice job, Jim Balls. He called it, these are my animal proteins. I understand in some countries, people really frown on animal proteins, but you can see really differences in terms of the RUP levels. Here's your animal sources. This would be your byproduct feeds, and here sits some of your other feeds out there as well. So certainly we know those vary. Number 2, coming on NRC again, simply says that if you got a dry cow, or you got a cow at 4% of body weight, which is a pretty good producing cow, look at all those numbers change. And that's why when you get your NRC book, there is no metabolizable protein requirement directly. In other words, because it's not like when we had the crude protein. So be well aware, these numbers are always changing depending on dry matter intake and intestinal digestibility. You're going to be hearing more about that, I believe, in Jessica's presentation here, but you can see here is my extruded soybean meal. Bingo, we Catholics would say, here says meat and bone meal. And that can really be quite low in availability. And that becomes the other part of the program as well. And that's why some of you are very cautious of where you buy your byproduct feeds and your animal protein sources from, because you know there's good stuff and there's some stuff that isn't maybe quite as good out there in the feeding program. So you know my slide. You've been there and you do it at this stage of the game. So some of you probably saw this. This was published in the Journal of Dairy Science. Dr. Jimmy Clark and his colleagues there put together a study and looked at all the different research done about 4 years ago. And the thing to remember is right down here, simply says that values that do not cross the 0 line are statistically significant. And so here we go. I'm just going to give you 3. There's a whole paper on this. Now, being an extension, I can get a whole paper down to 3 PowerPoints. So we move on. We move on. That's very funny. Only 4 of you laughed at that. We move on. I'll explain it to the rest of you later. Anyway, here we look at milk crude protein yield. That's kind of our theme today. You can look at different RUP sources. Here they're grouped. The numbers here says how many studies there are. And you can see we don't see a lot of movement in terms of going above 0 or a % change. And the control is a soybean meal-based diet. It is not urea. It's not distillers grains. It's soybean meal. Okay, understand that? We're coming there. And so you can see fish meal tends to be, although it's not statistical, that's the winner. That's the winner. Now, what's the problem with fish meal? You better be pretty rich and not have many coons in the area because they love fish meal. Anyway, we move on. So remember, this is milk crude protein yield. Crude protein, not true protein. Dry matter intake. And again, you can see, generally speaking, these RUP sources were not big buddies. They're not going to build dry matter intake until you get over here to the corn byproducts. That surprise anybody in this room? Corn distillers grain. Pretty palatable stuff. Pretty palatable stuff. Here sits your soy product. So if there's winners, they still don't cross 0. You can see here's winners. But here sits fish meal. And if you're going to drive dry matter intake, doik, that's not a winner. That's not the winner. And then you come down to milk yield. And I know I see several of you that sell these products. Here sits your soy byproduct, bypass protein, and it's a clear winner. It really drives milk yield based on the data that he pulled from the Journal of Dairy Science, Journal of Animal Science, and probably the Canadian Journal as well, and looked at that. So the point is, depending on what you are buying and what are you putting in your protein supplements will make a difference. Will make a difference, and we got to get it right. So then we come back to economics. So I just thought I'd throw this one in here. This is the Wisconsin Feed Val version 6.0. All of you heard about that. Some of you are probably, anybody here using that? Anybody using the Feed Val program? Okay, 2 hands. That's just wonderful. Moving on. Anyway, you 2 guys you're way ahead of the group. You can see that already. Anyway, what you're simply going to do, much like Sesame, it's going to say, well, what are these worth? What are these worth? And of course, in Feed Val 6, you can pick RUP as one of your variables. You can pick starch. You can pick energy. Here you got RDP. You can pick there. And any feed over here in green as an example, is a winner. Anything in red says it's not a good buy. And so we just updated this in September. And these are Wisconsin numbers now. That's the beauty. You can put your Pennsylvania, New York, Canadian numbers in here. You put your forage test results in for your alfalfas and your corn silages because it'll look specifically at your forages. So you can really make this program work for you. And you can see here, interesting here, hay is overpriced. It simply says that the current price in Wisconsin, $176 a ton for high quality alfalfa, and it's only worth $146. So the computer says that's not a good buy. The really good buy is down here, low quality alfalfa. And you'll all smile and say, yeah, right. That's a really good buy. Probably only cost me 8 or 10 pounds of milk. But the computer could care less about that. They're simply saying, how does it break out? And so you can look at all these here. Our corn guys love to have this slide up here because it says corn at $3.37 a bushel, which is pretty close where it is. And that price is probably going to go where, guys and gals? Probably go down. Probably go down a little bit. And it says the break even is $5.23 a bushel. So corn's a really good deal. You nutritionists, what does that mean to you? Hang on to your hats. We're going to feed corn this year because it's relatively inexpensive for the nutrients I'm bringing to the diet. And then you come to my talk this afternoon, we talk about lameness, and we move on. Here's the byproduct feeds. And now you can see as well, look at these byproduct feeds, at least in Illinois and Wisconsin, unbelievable. Look at distillers, look at corn gluten feed here. Here's the soy hulls, wheat midds. Even fuzzy cotton seed gets closer. Gets closer. I love fuzzy cotton seed. I know Larry Jones doesn't. I see him in the back of the room. He doesn't like that stuff, but I like it. And it's coming a little bit closer here, but we're not totally sure what the hurricane totally did, where that price is going to go. So one of the guys in the Midwest said, boy, you guys better lock that sucker in. You better lock that in. But that's your call, not mine. Factor number 5. And the good news, Pat, we're 2 minutes ahead of schedule. Milk urea nitrogen. What a wonderful tool. What a powerful tool. Because what it simply does, it looks in the rumen. It tries to answer the question, are you capturing the rumen degradable protein, the ammonia, the recycling of urea? Are we capturing that? Is the cow getting it done? And of course, if it gets too high, it goes across the wall, and then the liver says, this will kill my cow. Now, we were at a talk 3 or 4 years ago where an English guy was speaking. He argued, I'm not sure, Helena, if you agree with that, he argued they had data that says that if you get really high ammonia levels, the liver can't detoxify at all. And they could find ammonia in the bloodstream. I've never seen the data published, but isn't that intriguing? Isn't that intriguing? We'll let you think about that one a little bit. And we know how it recycles. We showed that a bit earlier, so it overlaps a little bit. So here we go. What number are you going to use with your herds? I assume your herds are like our herds. Every bulk tank, we get milk urea nitrogen. And we do a weekly, we tell our dairymen, do a weekly average. You can get some spiking, some unusual things going on there. There's our number right there in Penn State blue. 8 to 12. Now, if you Google it, you're probably going to find this more typical, 10 to 14. Our really good herds that are really got our cooking are sitting around 10 or 11. So where do you want your herds to be? What is that number here in Pennsylvania, New York, Canada, wherever you're from? And be well aware there's a fair amount of variation that occurs here as well. So we're saying if the MUNs are over 16, that's my caution light. It says, wow, that's a fairly high number. And it may have some negative effects over here, and here are some things I'd look at. If it gets below 8, then the red light or the orange light goes on again and says, wow, are we sure that we've got those rumen microbes really maxed out? We're not, quote unquote, holding them back or starving them out there in the program as well. Now, if it's below 5, all the cows are dead. They're all dead. Now, they may be walking around, but they're dead cows. So that's what Dr. Drakely told me, and I would never challenge Dr. Drakely. So if these numbers look unusual, here are my checklists that I would go through. And for those of you that are following along in my PowerPoints, you should have just turned the page. 18 of you turned the page. A lot of you did not. David, you did not turn the page. Patty's in charge of taking all the important notes here. We had a big discussion. She's the official note taker here. And David is still wide awake, so we're doing well. Here, we'll move on. So here are the things I'd look at. So if my MUNs are really high or low, I would kind of look at these numbers here and say, well, maybe there's an opportunity to improve the MUN values on the herd. But this is my take-home slide from a dairy farmer. Simply says, this comes from Wisconsin, from their model, done several years ago. And it simply says, I've had a big cow from Wisconsin with a 14 MUN. That's how much nitrogen she's excreting. If I get her down to a 10, that's how much she's excreting. That difference is equal to about 2 plus or 1 kilo of soybean meal. And now my farmer can see that. A pound of soybean meal. I know what that is. I got to buy that stuff. There, anywhere, depending where you're living, somewhere to 37 to 50 cents a day if I get my MUNs correct. And there's another 40 cents laying on the table. Is he excited? Is she excited? 40 cents laying potentially on the table. And so this also comes from their model. Simply says there's 2 questions. If you're going to increase nitrogen efficiency, and the folks from Cornell said if we get this right, we're going to be getting up to 40%. So if you start getting up in that 35% range, you can see the MUNs are going to be right down on the low level. Their model also says, but if you're selling protein, which you guys and gals are, then we're going to be sitting over here, and you're going to be sitting at these higher MUN levels. Now the question is, can you have your cake and eat it? And the answer is, sure you can. Because I think your Rumen models will allow you to fine-tune that point. What I find interesting, guys, look where these 2 lines cross. About 11. I am not sure that has any relevance in the talk, but I thought it's kind of neat. It says, well, where's the sweet spot for you baseball guys? Where's the sweet spot? And that might be the sweet spot sitting right around 10 or 11 out there in the program if you look at those 2 lines using their model from the University of Wisconsin. Factor number 6. The impact, impacting milk protein production. And here we can go pretty fast. This comes from Dr. Clark. And he says, well, if the milk protein is low, especially those first 100 days, where might I look? And I'm not going to read these to you other than just simply say, look at RDP, look at the RUP in the diet, and then look at the quality of the RUP. And there's a whole bunch of things listed underneath there that are pretty straightforward. Another one is overfeeding, or you could say underfeeding rumen fermentable sugars and starches. Either one. Or an impact on physically effective NDF. That could also cause a problem with amino acid yield coming out of the rumen. Another one down here is overfeeding fat, especially if it's unprotected oils. More about that this afternoon in the lameness breakdown. We'll give you our guidelines, what that number should be. But we know that can be a factor as well. And of course, there's some pretty neat work coming out of Dave Barbano's group that says, yep, that can be a factor as well. Here's another one that would have been Horde's Dairyman by John Geiser, and he's here at the conference as well. And that is if you got spoiled or contaminated feeds. Could be molds, could be microtoxins, could be yeast count. That could be a problem in northern Wisconsin, parts of New York, because you guys are going to have some late harvested corn silages, which may be very wet. So you might be in this window up here as well. And then finally, it just says a poor job in the feed bunk. Feed bunk management, feeding frequency, consistency, sorting, all those kind of important things that go on the dairy farm. Factor number 7 is kind of where I have to stop. And that is, well, are you now ready? You checked off the first 6 boxes and you said, yep, George, you got her. Sally, we're there. We're okay. Now the question is, should you be looking at amino acid balancing? And so there's my number. Where's your number? I'm using 2.4 pounds of true protein per day. It's kind of my cut point. And for Holstein cow, that's 80 pounds. With a 3-1 test, that gets you pretty close to 2.4. Jerseys, you're going to see about 60 pounds with a 4.1 true protein out there on the herd. So where is your cut point? For fat, I'm at 70 pounds. When I get a herd over 70 pounds of milk, I start looking at ether extract. And some of us in the crowd still aren't quite convinced on that yet. But we'll move on. But the point is, where should you be looking? When would you want to really be sure you might be wanting to at least explore needing to add extra amino acids. Now, why would you do that? Well, again, I go back to my good colleague, Jimmy Clark. You notice I borrowed lots of data from Cornell and from Jimmy Clark at Illinois. And he says, well, if you put in a rumen-protected amino acids, he argues three things can happen. The first one would be that the milk, actually, the first one is that milk protein actually goes up. That's something a farmer can see fairly quickly. And the good news, he sells it every day. Every day he sells it. Unlike something that has to do with reproduction or hoof health, we just don't sell a lot of hooves nowadays in the marketplace. He argues you can expect a tenth of a point, and my colleagues, consultants in the Midwest, said in key herds, you can see 0.2 of a point increase. And if you've got 80 pounds of milk and protein sitting at $2 a pound, boy, interesting calculation. And you can see his other comments there. Number two, you might, these are or you might see more milk. Not all bad. He said the research is saying anywhere from 0 to 5 pounds of milk. And that usually occurs in early lactation cows. And I think the North Carolina DHI data is screaming at us in early lactation saying, a neat opportunity. The problem I have in Illinois is that if I put amino acids in for early lactation cows, everybody gets them. And so will the tail-end cows limit my economic response. And then thirdly, you might see a butterfat test increase, especially when you're feeding rumen-protected methionine. And I think Dr. Cardoso will talk a little bit more about that a little bit later here, but certainly that becomes a factor as well. So the question is, on your checklist, where are you at? So what about this? And we did a survey. Now, this is 2 years old, so my apologies. Kind of older data. But I had to work really hard at this because we approached the major companies that were selling methionine. So this is 2-year-old data, so just eyes wide open. You guys and gals can refine this a little bit better. Somewhere around 2 cents per gram, 2.5 cents per gram of rumen-protected methionine. These are the bioavailabilities. They vary. Is that important? We had a big discussion last night on spreadsheets saying, what's the bioavailability of amino acids that you're buying? How many think they vary? How many think it varies? How many have looked at that? How many have asked the question? We move on. Estimates there was that two major suppliers, who will remain nameless, have 74% of the market 2 years ago. And they estimated, and this is very soft data, Horridge Dairyman isn't collecting it. I wish they would. That'd be a nice place to grab it. They don't do that. Somewhere around 20-25% of the cows in the United States are getting rumen-protected methionine, more in the Midwest. It is what it is. That came up several times. What about lysine? Well, at that time, a little more expensive. Now, last night we did some checking, and my understanding is a little closer to 2 cents per gram of rumen-protected lysine. Viability will vary with newer technologies, new processes. Those numbers are going to be more aggressive. So talk to these people and find out there. And it looked like slightly lower levels of being used here. And I think probably more interest when milk protein prices at $2.50 a pound than with $1.70. Farmers are businessmen. They really look at that as well. Well, here comes the big one. I'm not going to say anything about it. It's in your proceedings. But this was put together, I think, by out of New Hampshire. It's got a few years on it now. I take a look at it up here. And here are 3 different models. See them listed? You can see what the optimal levels would be. And the point is what, guys and gals? They're different. They are different. And you can see different levels for such things as milk protein content, a yield of milk protein. And so the question is, what are you? Is the glass half full or half empty? If the glass is half empty, you're simply saying, well, I'm not going to use a model until they're all the same. Or you're going to say the glass is half full and I'm going to use a model to help me try to predict a bit what's going on the farm and then make my decision. And I know some of my consultants, they had magic numbers they were looking for, grams per day. What should that differential be? And that's where I stop. The last factor, and we're done, and that is, well, what is our farmers doing? And I think the geneticists still are pretty clear. If you believe milk protein in the future is going to be important, and I'm one of those that vote for that, then we should be selecting for pounds of true protein in our breeding program. We want to breed for more protein. And that's a question. That's another benchmark. George, what's your genetic program in milk components? What are you doing? Are you selecting for more fat, more protein? Are you doing it on a percentage base? Are you looking at total yield? Might be really surprised to know that. Do you ask that question? Here you are, the nutritionist, you're saying, George wants a 3-9 butterfat test and a 3-2 protein test. And genetically, he's got what? Something less than that number as well. So what is our take-home messages? Well, Adam, I'm going to stay on schedule. I got to go really, really, really slow here because I'm not even going to get to the 5-minute mark. We move on. I think, and these are my biases, we should make each one of you sit down and write your biases. Number one, I think metabolizable protein or metabolizable amino acids, probably should have changed that last night, didn't get that done, is an improvement over crude protein in digestible protein. I think it's going to be an improvement. And the question is, should this now be metabolized amino acids rather than protein? Number two, I would argue with you, those of you that fell asleep or dozed off, that you need some type of computer Rumen balancing modeling program to calculate metabolizable protein and metabolizable amino acids. I think you just have to do that. And if you were feeding my herd, and I'm a dairy farmer, and you came into my yard and said, well, now I must say, well, what model are you? Are you using the Cornell model? Are you using the Nittany Cow? Which program are you using? Oh, I don't use that. I don't use any of those programs. I just use crude protein. Well, let's get a cup of coffee and down the road we go. I think meeting amino acid requirements is going to be more important than metabolizable protein, but we'll leave it at that. You're going to have more speakers that are much more knowledgeable and doing research in that area. Be well aware that RUP values vary a great deal depending on intake, rate of feed passage, source of RUP, how it's been processed. That really jumps all the way around. And then finally, check other factors that can impact amino acid yields in milk. And that would be the dry matter, the environment, the genetics, that whole checklist of 7 factors that are in the front of your book. And with that, I am done. And we are not going to take questions. We're ready to go on to our next speaker. So you may get an extra cup of coffee out of this whole deal here. So I'll turn that program back to our host. Thanks very much. Have a good day.